Hallo, leuk dat je kijkt. Ik ben Tanja en dit is Tanja Talks Amsterdam. Vandaag gaan we praten met een van de meest iconische parfumeurs van deze tijd. De parfumwereld was in 2006 nogal voorspelbaar. Er waren Chanel, Dior, Estée Lauder en L'Oréal en daarnaast een paar modernistische parfumhuizen, zoals The Different Company van Jean-Claude Ellena. Maar niemand echt disruptive en rebels. Met de handige marketing, vermomd als vernieuwing, was er een golf van celebrity parfums aan het begin van de 20e eeuw. Niet echt een revolutie als je het mij vraagt, want waarom zou iemand een geur van Sarah Jessica Parker dragen? Het concept van parfumerie was oudbollig, stoffig en toe aan een reset. Maar in de stilte was er een stormopkomst. En met de lancering in 2006 van Escentric Molecules 01-series werd een van de meest rebelse merken in parfumerie een feit. Met slechts één enkel ingrediënt, die ook nog eens synthetisch is, deed Molecule 01 veel stof opwaaien. En is sindsdien uitgegroeid tot een van de meest iconische en rebelse merken van deze tijd. Less is more is hun motto. Wat Elon Musk voor de auto-industrie was, is Geza Schoen voor de parfumindustrie. En vandaag praat ik met de bedenker en parfumeur van Escentric Molecules, Geza Schoen. Hi Geza, welcome
Hello.
to Amsterdam.
Hi.
Good to have you. Yes, so I guess a first question would be, was it always your dream to become a perfumer? And how do you get from a perfumer to the founder and the nose of Escentric Molecules?
I think for the first time really that I got in touch with the perfume world as such, it was when I was 13 and I started collecting samples of fragrances. Back then it was unlike today. There were just a few dozen of men's and a few dozen of women's fragrances, and that was the whole market. So there wasn't a lot. And I realized in magazines there were advertising of fragrances, but there was always at the bottom, there was like the so-called depot. And that was where, whatever, let's say Parfum Balmain was based in Germany. This is where they had their, not their headquarter, but where they would store the fragrances. And it would give you an address. So it would say Düsseldorf and the proper address. So what I then did was I would buy a postcard, which was 40 pennies back then, so 20 cents these days. And I would write that address on there and go like, hey, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really interested in your fragrances. Could you please send me some samples? And they would. So this is how I started. So I just flipped through magazines to see, what other brands would advertise, and they would give out an address. So I would send postcards. So I would come back from school every day and, once or twice a week, it was like Christmas because somebody would have sent me more samples. And they were all for free. I couldn't believe it, So this made my my collection grow quite a bit. And so within the first year, I'm sure I had already a few dozen of different fragrances. And I would come back from home. I would come home from school and then just smell these fragrances. And just smell them and go through and sort of open the bottles and be very happy about it. So the first interest was really done by that. And then I remember when I was 16, I went to the US. I had a student exchange for 1 month. I went to Ohio. And obviously, they had different fragrances in the US. So I brought more samples. I realized, other countries, different smells. So my collection grew. And I think from 13 to 16 was a phase where I slowly got into the idea that fragrances are actually really cool, and I really liked that. So next to that, I was still playing football and tennis and spending probably after school the rest of the day outside. But it became a hobby, very clearly. That's how I think I got into it.
Okay, so you were still regular guy playing football, and then in the rest of the time, sniffing fragrances, which was kind of unusual.
It was very unusual. Yeah.
And then you could do a study to become a perfumer?
No, that in those days, people would think, Giorgio Armani, not does he only do the fashion, but he would also do his own fragrances, and so did Karl Lagerfeld and Gianni Versace. That was what people thought in those days.
Okay.
And I might have been that even I thought that when I was 13. I didn't think that when I was 16. I'm sure I was smarter then. And it became slowly a thing which would enter the press like, oh, they're perfumers working on this. And then I had a very funny moment when I met the daughter of the boss of Germany's biggest perfume house, which was Harman and Reimer in Holzminden. I happened to meet her in Wiesbaden, which was far away from my hometown, but it was really, I mean, was it a coincidence? I don't know. In hindsight, there was really some sort of a fatal moment, because she turned out to be the daughter of the boss of the biggest company, and she then said to me, look, you need to get in touch with this person if you're really interested in that. So I did. So she gave me the name of the chief perfumer, which was Mr. Egon Oelkers, and I was still only 16, and I remember I sat on the train and just went to Holzminden. It was like 1 hour up north from my hometown, and I just got out, and already it smelled in the air, you know. I was fascinated, and I walked from the train station to the company. That was only like 500 meters, and I was there, and I said, can I talk to someone? And they were like, well, do you have an appointment? I said, no. What's that? And they said, yeah, but you need an appointment. I said, yeah, I understood that now, but can I talk to someone? And they said, not really. So I spoke to the head of human resources. She came out and said, do you have an appointment? I said, no, I don't. And she said, okay, let's make an appointment for like in half a year. So basically she got my phone number, and we arranged that they would call me. They did call me later and gave me a date. So half a year later, I went back with a friend who had a car, and I turned up and I met her. And with her came the chief perfumer.
Egon Oelkers.
Egon Oelkers, right. He sat with her, Eva Maria Plesch was her name, and we talked. And I said why I'm here and what I wanted ideally, and Mr. Oelkers was very interested and said, okay, you know what? In another half year time, you come back and we do like some smell test. Yeah. So to see whether you actually, you know, you can smell and
skills,
and we can foresee that
talent. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's more to it. Yeah.
Exactly. So that was exactly why he wanted to see me again, and of course I came half a year later. I was there, spot on, and then he made tests with me. So I spent several hours actually in the firm. I was fascinated that also they were just that open, obviously, you know, because back then the job was really not very well known. Nobody said, I want to become a perfumer. Exactly. That didn't exist, you know. So it was still very rare, and as it turned out, I mean, I stayed in touch with them over the years because I was maybe 16, 17 by then, and I was doing, you know, my A-levels at school. I made Abitur after 13 years, and then did civil service, which back then took another 20 months out of my life. It was a good experience, but it was a long time. So from the time when I had been in touch with them till I then joined was like almost like 5 years.
Oh wow,
so,
very persistent.
And and then I was at civil service. I remember in February 1990, they called me and they said that they would like to consider me for the next education. And I was like, I cannot believe that. But so all the persistence sort of paid off at the end.
There you go.
And so I thought, that's just absolutely fabulous. I couldn't believe it. And so in August 1990, I joined Harman and Reimer as like an elective placement. So I came in, but the education wouldn't start till January 92. So I had to bridge 1.5 years. You know, so they put me into various stages. I had to look at production. I was in all these labs.
So you learned the industry behind the perfume.
Yeah, I was like my own autodidact, trying to see.
How cool is that?
It was fantastic. I mean, they gave me an office next to the chief perfumer, next to Egon Oelkers. I had my own scale. I was just doing trials. I was smelling. It was like mad. I remember the first day when I joined, 1st of August, I came in and I left at 7 o'clock in the evening. Everyone else had left. I was the last one. When I came out, they sort of said, "Who are you?" So they kind of stopped me. I said, oh, sorry, I was just late.
I carried away.
Yeah, so until I joined, actually, that's a funny story. Until I joined, a month before that, everyone in that firm started to work at 7:15 in the morning. I had never heard of anything like that. You know, I mean, I went to school and I did civil service, but so they just swapped it to flexi time, which then was from 7 to 8, you could choose when to start. But you had to be there at 8 o'clock. That wasn't really my concept of sort of beginning the day. So I kept in sort of coming in later sometimes just because I thought, I can't make 8 o'clock.
Even back then, you were already like a rebel and a bit disruptive for everybody.
I fully agree, and I'm really embarrassed about that in hindsight, but it was just the way it was. So I bridged 1.5 years, and then in January 92, the proper education started with 3 other guys. So we were 4 guys, 1 from Argentina, 2 other German guys, and myself. We started the education to become a perfumer.
And so then you have to learn all the ingredients and all the, if you put this and that together, then you'll get something totally different.
Well, it starts like the first half year, you're just smelling ingredients because there are thousands of ingredients. You have about 300-400 naturals. You have about, at least I would say, 150 to 200 bases, which are like pre-compounded bases made of ingredients to form one, as in like a rose base, a lily of the valley base, a fruit base, a woody base. So plus all the chemicals, you talking about probably something like 1.5 to 2,000 things to smell.
Wow.
So that takes a long time, right? So you took months, and I remember at least half a year with just smelling ingredients, and then slowly you start to make little accords, and then you start doing copies of existing classic fragrances. Like you would take a Draca Noir, you would take a Chanel 5, you would take other fragrances which became classics. So you want to understand, first of all, what's in those fragrances and what made them so great. So you try to understand. I mean, I'm sure it's the same with everything. If you want to become a graphic designer, you know,
you have to know the components. It's like cooking in a way.
Like anything of creative cultural attitude, you need to understand what has been there and what was good, what can I take from that, and then try and do your own stuff. So
and then there it was, sitting on the shelf.
Sitting on the shelf.
Small bottle.
Yeah. At
ISO A.
Well, probably the first day. Or maybe the second day when I joined. Oh yeah, I didn't finish that story. When I left at 7 o'clock in the evening, Harman and Reimer, I went, they had booked me a hotel, a cheap hotel, where I could stay the first week to find my own place then. And I remember I came to my hotel room and I was so tired. I laid down on the bed and I woke up next morning, 7 o'clock. I was absolutely finished. My body had never smelled so much stuff in its life. And I must have been so tired, I didn't move for 12 hours. So I woke up next morning and thought, fuck, what happened? Where
am I?
Where am I? And so I got up, probably had a shower, and then went back into the firm. But I was, that world already taking me in completely. Absorbed. Yeah. And then first or second day, I smelled iconische super, as they had put it as an ingredient on my shelf in my little trying out room. And that, when I smelled that, I remember where I sat when I smelled that. It was so impressive. And that made me understand fragrances I liked before, where I didn't know what was in them. And that was sort of then the link to understand, that's why you like this fragrance and that fragrance. Yes, overall, there probably were also good fragrances, but that ingredient in those fragrances enhanced
repeatedly
the aesthetics I liked.
De parfum. Yeah.
So exactly. That was like the starting point. And I remember also just only a few days later, I said to Mr. Oelkers, I said, would you just wear iconische super, and would you put it on your neck? And he said, absolutely not.
Did he say why?
Yeah. He said, I could not imagine to wear a linear aroma chemical. because the paradigm of perfume until then was you make complex structures.
Yeah, exactly. The more, the better. Or in a way, almost.
Yeah. So like, you know, a fragrance needs to be fresh and needs to be fruity and green and then spicy maybe, and then needs to be floral, needs to have a big heart and needs to have a dry down. So there must be this logic in it. And I was like, okay.
Fair enough.
So I just took it and thought, yeah, fair enough, you know. So, and I forgot about it as well because I didn't join Harman & Reimer to identify single ingredients to then fill them in a bottle. That was not the case. So 3 years later, when Alessandro Gualtieri showed up, we were still trainees, and he showed up. He was the guy from Italy. Said, "Hey, I have a briefing here from Diesel, Fashion Diesel," and so we were all very keen to start working on that. I mean, obviously we were only there for like 2 years, so we had, you know, we weren't
no experience.
that
You were like,
advanced.
yeah, exactly.
We were still like kids,
rookies.
exactly. So playing around
In a way.
and. I remember, so Alex and I, we became friends back then because there wasn't much going in Holzminden, and he was a different thinker already back then, so was I. And so I remember we were in his hotel room one evening, and I know that he was planning to go to Diesel next day to meet them and show them some of our ideas. I said to him, "Hey, look man, why don't you show them Isui Super as a single ingredient?" And he said, "I think that's even too far-fetched for Diesel." So
little did he know.
But lots did he know about my well-being, obviously, because he didn't do it. And of course, I am grateful for that moment. That, I mean, no one could have had the view to see into the future and to determine that probably would have worked for Diesel or any other brand as well. Just because if somebody would have started wearing Isui Super, it would have been noted by someone.
Exactly, but it was what, mid-90s, end of 90s? 93, yeah.
It was too early.
The perfume world was really like totally different.
It just started to emerge even back then. You know, brands realized what a potential that has. So that didn't happen. I was a bit pissed off about it in hindsight. I remember like, you don't like my idea, fair enough. And I just left it with that. I mean, I then became a perfumer, but I was still in the training. I then started I was working in Argentina for 4 months. I came back, then they sent me to Singapore. I came back to Germany. I finished the perfumer's exam after 5 years. Then I went back to Singapore. Then I went to England. I stayed there 3 years. Then I went to the US. I went to New York, where I was meant to stay 3 to 5 years. But that was a complete fuck up.
Exactly.
So I then went back to Paris, and my last 1.5 years being employed was in Paris. And then I had enough.
You just got fed up with the corporate.
I was fed up with the corporate
world.
structures. I was fed up with, in particular, the management of Harman & Reimer back then. They really didn't get it. The best briefings would bypass our company, so we didn't have really a big chance to work on cool stuff.